Hey everybody, Yehuda Sunshine here, head of PR at Odix, live from the Odix studios, and I'm really excited to have everybody here today to have a really lively and exciting conversation about the relationship of IT governance and critical infrastructure protection. This afternoon we are joined by Oren Eytan and Denise Louie. Oren, would you like to introduce yourself, kind of tell us a little bit of your background?
Hi, Yuda. Uh, I'm Oren Eytan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Odix, a cybersecurity company. I spent over 25 years with the Israel Defense Forces as the head of the cybersecurity unit of the IDF, responsible for protecting all the assets of the IDF against cyber attacks. Um,
No
this
small
is
feat there. Great. So thank you so much for joining us. Denise, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes, hi, I'm Denise Louie, and I am transitioning from the JM Smucker Company, but my role was twofold, leading information governance and also enterprise risk management for the company. Prior to that, I had spent some time with both Protiviti, which is a boutique internal audit and IT risk, and actually a variety of risk consulting firm, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I have about 30 years under my belt, primarily in the IT risk space. So my subtitle in LinkedIn, I call myself the risk whisperer. So happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. It's always great to have the Caesar Milan of the cyber world to join us for the podcast. Uh, I'm really excited to have you guys here and kind of talking a little bit about why IT governance is important and how that can really change the risk profile for critical infrastructure. So I'd like to really start about the relationship between resilience and protection. You know, there's a big difference between trying to protect yourself and trying to be able to build the programming and policies that you are, you know, set up for long-term resilience and cyber protection. So Denise, maybe you could tell us what's it like to try and convey this idea of imparting the relationship between resilience and protection, and why is it important for critical infrastructure?
Well, so obviously your critical infrastructure is that which is either guiding your operations or containing some of your most critical data assets, right? Some of which are governed by law because perhaps organizations were not doing what they were supposed to be doing in the first place relative to that data. Say, for example, personal information or personal health information. But there's a big difference between kind of that minimum bar of meeting the letter of a law, say, and there are, and I've spoken with many IT executives over the years, and frankly CFOs and other members of the C-suite who are struggling to understand these concepts, right? And they often, through at the headlines, understand that there is a certain law that's driving a certain level of investment in this area. And they feel oftentimes, as I've been chatting with them, that once you have met the bar of complying with the law, that they have done what they need to do. But it's important for our most senior executives to understand that the way that law is written is frankly the minimum level of protection that an organization should be seeking. Business is constantly evolving. The number of transactions that you're dealing with, suppliers and customers constantly evolving. The technologies that the bad actors are using is also constantly evolving. And so this is a consistent effort that an organization must make, and honestly, go above and beyond. It kind of reminds me of a quote from Zig Ziglar, who is an American, he's since passed, but an American motivational speaker. And he talked about how, motivation doesn't last, and neither does beta, which is why we, recommend that you do it on a daily basis. And I think the same thing applies to your efforts in information governance and in IT governance and in the protection and driving toward resilience. This is something that you need to be doing on a routine basis, a daily basis to work and to learn from your mistakes and to advance.
Mm-hmm. So, Oren, I want to kind of pass the torch to you over here. From your experience, being responsible for defending Israel's critical infrastructure, how did you manage this balance, and how do you think that this relationship is different in critical infrastructure versus other sectors which aren't deemed as nationally important or critical?
Yeah, well, the very first sentence, I wouldn't say resilience versus protection, but I would say resilience and protection because they complement each other. So it's not that, if you have resilience, you can give up your protection and vice versa. So it's when you're talking about strategy
Mm-hmm.
and when you're talking about policy, uh, then you need to think of all the layers. So, when you're thinking about critical infrastructure, and there are a lot of them, and only the definition of critical infrastructure is differ between states, between countries, and but I would say that the critical infrastructure is an asset that if this one is hurt, it's causes substantial damage to the nation. And as of that, there are so many critical infrastructure if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're dealing with them, you need to build uh, a full coverage. So it starts with you know, when you're talking about resilience, when you're talking about some of the rules that you want to impose on your organization, and if you want to the behavior, start from the behavior of the employees and the way that they act and their education and their training, and it goes all the way for several. It's not about technology. It's not all about technology. Technology is only one single layer over there,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes people misjudge. We're talking about a full and trying to be a foolproof, uh, 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 let's say, strategy for organization. Protection is is really more about technology. Is really more about okay, what means you're going to use in order to protect your network. Where are you going to use this means? I mean, are you going to sit on the fence and try to make sure nothing is getting into it, or are you trying to look after things that get into your network? So there's a lot of doctrines also in protecting critical infrastructures. Um, we all know that the isolation and is one of the best words that risk analysts like about critical infrastructure. But what happens is that the day-to-day life calls you to have some networking and some connectivity, and you need to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So not every time you can keep kind of a full isolation. So in summary, I would say it's very challenging, and I think and I think that after dealing with critical infrastructure for so many years, like Denise, so I think that you need to have the right mixture uh, between resilience and protection in your organization.
Mhm. That kind of leads me to my next question about the division of accountability, both between individuals and technology and company policies. And maybe Denise, you could kind of chime in here. how do you articulate that division from creating a policy to be able to, get this corporate buy-in of all the individuals to being able to ensure that all the players are following through, across the supply chain and across the organization? It's definitely a complicated feat, yeah.
It is. And like years ago, I would have thought that it was a win if just a handful of people within IT understood, the security concepts and the core fundamentals in terms of protecting your data assets, right? And then as the years progressed in my career, I realized, no, wait a second, it's all IT professionals need to have this understanding, right? But now I would say that we have progressed as a society and as this interconnected global network of suppliers and companies and consumers of products, that we all now need a basic literacy of IT risk and IT security and these concepts. And so when you're writing policy and when you're writing procedure, you need to recognize, kind of what is the basic skill level of the individuals that you're touching. You really do need to understand the credentials that your team has. Literally, do they have credentials to support their work in this field? And therefore they've got that baseline knowledge, and you build from that. Or are you teaching people the very fundamentals from the very beginning? And that would severely change the approach that you would end up taking. I know in my career, when I first started out in my career as an auditor, and we would give recommendations when we saw some gap in a particular practice. We would offer a solution that was the blue sky. Here's the perfect way of doing it, and it took not into consideration where the organization was maturity-wise, right? And so one of the most valuable tools that an organization can use as it endeavors to do this work is to understand where it is on the maturity scale, right? And think about it across, and I know we're using the term infrastructure in terms of critical infrastructure, but as an organization, think about how sophisticated is your policy? Do you even have one, number one? But is it complicated? Is it well understood? Is it easily accessible by all of the people who need to see it, including your suppliers? Your people, again, what is their skill level? How sophisticated are the systems that you're using to manage the process? Is it complicated? Do people understand the level of complication? And likewise, is there a methodology that you've adopted? There's several different, you've got your ISO framework, you've got several different frameworks, but do people understand that, and are they applying that? And so as you look to, it's important to understand where you are and where you're targeting. And certainly when it comes to your critical infrastructure, you're going to want to be targeting the world-class approach to protecting those assets, right? This is not the time for heroics. This is not the time for, oh, so-and-so has left the organization and now we don't know what to do. You really need to give some thought to where you are, where you want to go, and then take those baby steps to get there. But those are among the many recommendations that I can offer to help people understand that division of responsibility. Yeah.
To kind of turn it to Oren there, I'd really like to hear kind of both how your military experience forced you to communicate this risk and division accountability differently, because obviously young soldiers who don't have 20 years of risk experience process it differently, and how you kind of built buy-in. And then my second part of that question is, you've had almost 20 years in the private sector now, how that experience has changed your approach in communicating this risk and level of accountability to your employees.
Okay, first of all, to your second question, tomorrow we are going to go through the certification for ISO 27001 for the company. So I'm trying that the shoemaker won't go, barefoot. So we're doing it tomorrow. We need to renew the certification for the ISO. But anyway, you see the accountability, in not only in the military, but in organization, at the end of the day, you have the CISO, or you have the one that is responsible for the information security of the organization. And when something happens, he needs to, provide the explanations. And so uh, I account him as the responsible for all the what's happening. And since he's the guy that at the end of the day, either the CEO or the chief of staff will come and say, okay, what happens here? So when you are a CISO, or when you are in charge of the cybersecurity of your company, uh, you said, okay, I have my, either, in the military, I have soldiers that are usually youngsters, age of 18 to 21. None of them are, cybersecurity guys, and, they have a lot of other things to do. So what I would do, I would train them and educate them and give them some basic tools in order to for daily behavior, and how to act in the presence of the evolving networking and cyber attacks and so on. But you cannot rely on these guys, either employees or soldiers or whatever. In every organization, you your state of mind should be, okay, I need to give them the policy there, as Denise said. I need to give them the right policy. I need to make sure they understand it. Need to make sure they fulfill it. But I want to make sure that I have another tools in order to protect myself, in order to keep this policy. And I want to have the technology that will help me to do that.
Hmm.
Because, at the end of the day, we've met so many cases, what I call the internal threats. That sometimes some cyber attacks were initiated from the internal threats, from internal employees. Sometimes they doing it intentionally, sometimes without any intention, but they just forward some malicious code from somewhere and so on. And there's always the famous experiment that someone spread like USB devices in the parking lot of a company, and 80% of the people pick it up and put them in their computer, despite all the policies and despite everything.
Hmm.
And then when they make a better experiment that put a logo of IBM on this USB device, 94% pick them up and put them in their computer. And again, despite of all the policies and the enforcement and so on. But if you have additional technology that would block the USB port, or will scan the USB port, whatever is getting into there, then you have the both, the employees that,
Hmm.
some of them are really responsible, some of them you can trust, but some of them, unfortunately, some doing mistakes. But then you have the technology that can cover on all these events that might slip, because of, an error, mistake, or intention
Hmm.
of one of the employees. So that's the way I see it.
Very, very interesting. So kind of moving on a little bit. I wonder, with now the broad flow of data that companies have, how do you analyze this? I'm gonna give this to Denise here. How do you analyze and elevate the important data, and how can you kind of convey the trends and risk profiles that you're seeing in here to the highest level, and then also being able to get buy-in from the rest of the employees to understand that things are changing and that we have the proof and we need to now put it into action. It's one thing to be able to get data, it's another thing to implement it.
Yes, yes. So It goes back to education, right? Like you need to have a pretty strong pipeline of communication out to your employees. Again, understanding kind of their education level in this topic, but
Mhm.
I think it starts really with the organization having a strong data classification effort underway to understand the different buckets of information that it handles and whether there is external law governing it,
Mhm.
wherever that law may be, in whatever jurisdiction of the world that the business operates in, or it is something that is contractually mandated by a customer of yours or a
Mhm.
supplier of yours, a contract manufacturer, for example, or something that maybe just simply, I don't want to say simply a trade secret of your own, but it's the onus is really on the organization to protect that asset. But to help your employees, and for that matter, any third parties that you routinely work with, to understand that tier of classification, right? Because there's just this vast wasteland of data, right? Not
Mhm.
all of it is absolutely critical, but you've got to start somewhere. And so, what is that pecking order of the data? And from the highest levels, what, let's just take personal information. What attributes are you tracking? And where does that information reside in the organization? And where does it flow, including outside of the organization and perhaps back to you?
Mhm.
Um, and as you do that, it behooves an organization to begin to calculate the value of that information. It can be done in several different ways. But believe me, there's a street value of that data, right? Certainly on the dark web, there's a value associated with the data. But, to have perhaps your finance organization help calculate how much did it cost for you to gather that information, especially if it was something that, came from the outside? How much does it cost for you to protect that information? What sort of future revenue streams might be lost if that information were gone? There's a number of ways that you can calculate it. And frankly, our kind of accounting systems aren't necessarily keeping up because there's in some respects from a regulatory accounting perspective, we don't have to track that information or convey that information publicly to
Mhm.
stakeholders, which is really strange to me, but that would give you an idea of the value of the information and then therefore kind
Mhm.
of the effort and the pecking order that you need to put toward protecting it.
Because I would think that this would really go right to Oren's experience when you're in the military and trying to explain this risk to the highest echelons of the obviously the service and then the political sphere. How do you sort through this, and how can you tell them that although the data could be coming from third party sources, we still need to heed the advice and then change our policy to be able to adapt to that risk?
So, well, in the military, we solved it very easily. It started also when the data was papers and written letters, and this is the classification method. So you have kind of non-classified documents. And then you have some classified, and you have different classifications like secret, top secret, and whatever the classification is, it dictates the level of protection that you need to provide to this to this document or to this source. And when it moves from paper to data, we did the same thing. Namely, we also said, okay, we need to provide classification for every email and for every data that's and piece of data that's getting into the network. And then we can treat this and we can impose a different policy based on the classification. So in critical infrastructure, they're trying to do something similar when they said, okay, we don't have like top secret or this kind of classification, but we have what we call, let's say, sensitive data. So if you look at uh, utilities company, if you look at electricity companies, so probably the data that command all the power plants, it's I would consider it sensitive because if someone get into it and put New York in dark. So I think it's really sensitive. Or if you want to a water company and look at the data that control the pumps. So I think this is sensitive, and in this way you can find and define what is the sensitive data in critical infrastructure. Once you were able to define the data, and once you were able to define the assets and the level of sensitivity and classification, then you can set policies and you can set of rules in order to protect them. And of course, and that's how they started with the kind of isolation for the OT network. The OT network usually take care of the sensitive data. All the sensitive data, whether it's a manufacturing plant of Coca-Cola or any car manufacturing, which a lot of secrets down there, or it's a power plant or any other oil and gas. So all this define the sensitive data. All this segment is called the ICS, the industrial control systems. That really what characterize them. They all have a segment of sensitive data. Once you have this and you define it, then you need to know how to protect it from complete isolation that you said. Complete isolation, I won't allow any data to get into it, to other, that you can share data, you can insert data, and you can have all other set of rules that you would like to have and to impose on your company. But definitely the data now uh, is, I mean, is big data. It's not data. It's because what we can do without the data. I mean, we the world relies on the data, and our mission is how to protect the sensitive data out of all these ocean of data.
Denise, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say, what I have seen, and this is, as we're looking to the future here, this data is taking so many different forms now. Yeah, back in the day, if it was sensitive enough and it was a document, it was marked confidential and treated as such. But now we've got email, we've got webinars where we're broadcasting a document on the screen, and the view that you might be looking at, maybe it says confidential in the footer, but the footer's not showing on the screen at the moment. That's happened, right?
Yeah.
And right, and you've got Microsoft Teams Spaces, or you've got Slack, and you've got all these different mechanisms now that some of this data that used to be very structured in how it was captured and how it was shared is now very unstructured in how it's captured and shared. And so I think the challenge has been magnified considerably because of that. And it is in our effort to collaborate so much better with everyone that the risk has exploded. It's just interesting to me that it was at one time very contained and somewhat, I would think, almost easier to administer. Not so much, going. I don't want to say not so much going forward. It's just the challenge that we need to rise to meet going forward.
Has kind of joined us. I think it's a great transition to kind of discuss what the future holds for IT governance and how it's going to impact infrastructure security. Oren, do you want to take it?
Well, yeah, this is a very interesting one. So what we see, the trend is, as I said, it's the data is all over, and big data, it's become very common. So whenever you deal with organization, whenever you deal with any networking, you have really lots of data and a lot of channels that this data may come to your network. And what I see is that uh, more and more AI tools are there in order to try to look at the data and try to find out and try to uh, make some decisions about the classification, because it's now become an issue how to really classify the data. It's
Yes.
when you already decide the classification of the data, then there's no problem how to protect it. But the issue will come how to navigate in the ocean of the data, and how you really uh, can define and what is really sensitive and what is not. And this has become the real issue, because once you identified, you have the tools how to handle all kind of classification. But when this ocean of data, is so many channels, they are all interconnected, they are all data is flow from here to there, and you sometimes lose control. Then you need the next generation of technology that really be able to select the data, really be able to I say navigate in this data ocean. This is the challenge.
Yeah, if I could speak to that too, I agree. I think of how this evolution of now how much unstructured data has just kind of taken over our networks, right? And without discipline, without an understanding of the value of the data that you're managing, you could inadvertently capture it in an unstructured way and broadcast it to a large audience that you did not actually intend. And it absolutely makes the protection of that data that much harder. But it makes me think of something that I wanted to into, oh gosh, 20 years ago, but it's called knowledge management, right? So how do you take these nuggets of your most sensitive trade secrets, or data assets? How do you discipline the organization in a way that that information remains contained in a certain, I'll use the word container, right? Like, how do you know that your personal information that you may be managing on behalf of your employees or your customers isn't somehow downloaded into an Excel spreadsheet and now shared on a team site and or shared with your auditors, and inadvertently with a much larger audience than you had ever intended to have before? It's, how do you build some discipline around these are the appropriate ways to extract the data, store the data, share the data. I think of, our work in records management and understanding exactly what is the value of each of the records that we create and what is the retention period for it, let alone the security and everything else around it. But it makes me think of, in the future, are we going to need to, again, train our employees to understand that data classification, understand that value, but also understand the appropriate methods for sharing the data, and then configure the systems to police that? And yeah, I do think AI is going to be needed to identify maybe the most egregious breaches, internal breaches of those protocols, because it may not find every instance of it, but I think that's where it's going to evolve. It's going to be a lot in the unstructured data space if we don't pay close enough attention to it. I think, we do a lot of work in the structured side of the IT house in protecting in terms of access and cybersecurity and segregation and segmentation of the network. But it's this unstructured area that is the Wild West right now.
We can't complete this discussion without saying few words about privacy.
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah.
We went pretty far, though. We went almost 35 minutes without mentioning privacy once. So that's pretty good.
so I feel guilty. I feel guilty that we didn't discuss the privacy issue, which is a major issue nowadays. It involves with all these policies that you have and governance and in Europe with the GDPR, it's really very strict rules about privacy, and this is one of the things that we should always bear in mind and consider when we're dealing about the whole organization, set of policies and how to enforce and so on. So this is maybe for our next talk, Denise. Maybe we should share some ideas about privacy.
Yeah, well, just a little snippet now. This is among the things that we've been doing. I mean, now in the United States, we if you are a primarily U.S. based company, you obviously are not subject to GDPR. But in California and now several other states are starting to follow suit in adopting laws that are very similar. And the benefit of finally this hitting the U.S. shores, for once and for all, is that it is driving conversations about data classification and the form and structure that that data takes, right? Like if you just have, if you have an employee's name and their email address, I know this is one of the things, and I know the Canada law is changing here too, but if you have an employee's name and their work email address and their work address and their work telephone number, that was not considered private data, because that was intended to facilitate commerce. In the United States, they're taking a slightly different approach, right? But it's driving, as you're training people about what this law means, you're driving that understanding again of the pecking order of the value of it. What is again, are you going to just try to comply with the bare minimum of the law that is going to constantly evolve? Or are you going to, aim to be a bit more resilient and above the law and meet the spirit and the intention of the law? But it's opening people's eyes to the way this data ends up traveling in the organization. And so I think, if anything, it's going to help everybody protect their most sensitive data assets even better than they did before. And maybe it took the privacy conversation for that to happen, but I'm glad it has, because the conversations are richer. And maybe I'll leave this as my final thought, but what we've done is tried, and I do this too with, I do these 5-minute fundamental videos on LinkedIn, helping people understand this is what privacy law means to you. This is what it means to you on a personal level. So then you can appreciate then perhaps what your responsibility is to, at a business on a professional level to protect that data, but not just personal information, but any sensitive asset of the company. So I try to drive it into getting back to everybody needs some sort of basic IT literacy. Allow this to be that mechanism to make that happen. And overall, we will all raise, the IT and the security acumen of everyone, which is so necessary these days.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing these points. Denise, thank you so much for joining us. Oren, is always a pleasure. And although some of our on-screen talent is kind of a little bit asleep, I personally thought it was really exciting, and I'm glad that everybody joined us. If you have any more questions or comments, please find us at odi-x.com or email me at yehudah@odi-x. Also, if you would like to check out Oren's most recent article on critical infrastructure on Forbes.com, please do. It's really a great read. We look forward to seeing you soon. All the best, everybody. Have a great night.